Hey party people. In this video, I'm going to talk about lace. And you know, when I was gathering all this information and putting my notes together for a lace video, I had so much stuff. Okay, so I decided to break it up. In this video, I'm going to cover, I'm going to show you a bunch of laces. I'm going to show you up close all these beautiful laces. I'm going to talk about the main, most popular categories of lace, how to design with them, you know, different design considerations with lace. I'm going to talk to you about different construction, pattern making, cutting, sewing considerations with lace. And I'm going to show you how to press lace. Yes, there's a way to iron lace correctly. And then if you want a sewing video, you know, like one with sewing demos of me in front of the sewing machine, drop me a comment below and I will work on that video as well. So let's start by looking at these laces up close. So laces can come in different formats. You can have an all-over lace that comes in wide yardage like this. It's just a repeating pattern. And always, anytime you're designing, you always want to take into consideration the width of your fabric and thinking about your yields, how big of a pattern piece you can cut as part of your design. You know, if you have a really small, narrow lace, you cannot cut big veils, big skirts without piecing things. So think about that always. And you know, it has like a nice, cool, delicate, pretty design. Some laces stretch, so you might want to think about that. There are also laces where it's straight on one side and then scalloped on the other. Okay, so if you have one scalloped edge, you can use the scallop as the hem of a skirt, a yoke, a bodice, something like that. Okay, so you can get these. This one's pretty narrow. Okay. And you can also get laces that are scalloped on both sides. Okay. This one is more trim-like. It's pretty narrow. When you have little bits, it looks kind of like fringe hanging from one end. That's called eyelashes. It's more obvious on this lace. This is an all-over lace, but you could cut in the middle here to get a scalloped edge with eyelashes along the hem of your bodice. So those are things that you can play with. So as I mentioned before, this is an all-over lace. The black one I just showed you is an all-over lace. It just means it's an all-over. It's repeating. The design is fairly small. You can treat it like a small print when it comes to cutting. This is called Alençon lace, and sometimes it's called corded lace. So Alençon, it refers to the region this kind of lace was originally made in, but it's a little bit like champagne, where people, even if it's not strictly champagne, you know what people are talking about. So it's this style of lace where you have a distinct design, flowers, generally speaking, some sort of floral, botanical with leaves and flowers. And the design is really distinct. You know, you're packing in stitches and then not so much to create more white areas, less white areas. You've got different mesh grounds. This one is more holy. This one is more delicate and small holes. Okay, to create a beautiful floral design. And then on the face of the fabric, you see these very thick cords. There's my thumb for scale. And you can see how you see there, the cords have a thread wrapping around the cord to attach it to the base fabric. Okay. Can you imagine all of this used to be done by hand? Not so much anymore, but this is Chantilly lace, and Chantilly lace is also named after a region in France from which it came originally. And just like Alençon, even if it's not Strictly Dickly Chantilly lace. That's how people refer it. And Chantilly is more delicate. It still has a lot of these floral motifs, like a lot of laces across the board anyway. And this one has metallic threads. The metallic has nothing to do with Chantilly. You can have metallic laces, non-metallic laces across the board. That's not what makes this Chantilly. This one has these cool paisleys, black threaded with gold metallic threads. And if you get really close, you can see that this lace also has these outlines around the main design components. And you're like, okay, so what's the difference between Chantilly and Alençon? And nobody in the world will definitively say, because they're all chicken, but here is what I think based on my research and my educated guess. Okay, the main difference, regardless of the design, is that one, Chantilly laces are in general much more delicate in design, and Chantilly cording is part of the structure, and it's made all together with the lace. And I think that because when you see the back of Chantilly, you can also still see the cording. It's like really in there. So that you can see it on the back, you can see it on the face. It's more prominent on the face, but you can still see it on both sides. Whereas Alençon, it is a very fat cording. It's typically this fat compared to the Chantilly outlines. And it's stitched on top. And that's why you can't see the cording on the back. But that's generally how you can tell the difference between the two. There are corded laces that are not Alençon, sorry, my French is terrible, Alençon or Chantilly. Here's an example. I bought a bunch of this stuff because I want to make something out of it one of these days when I have so much time. Okay, so here's a corded lace. That no one would call Alençon or Chantilly, let's be real. And you can see the distinct cords around all of these geometric shapes. Honestly, it's like some sort of corded Gua Pure geometric thing. We'll get to Gua Pure in a second. We have the cording, very distinct. You can kind of see it, but not really on the reverse. This is Gua Pure Lace, and it's very close to Venetian lace. They're very similar to each other, and many people use the terms interchangeably. This one doesn't have a traditional mesh background like the Chantilly or the Alençon. These are just all done in these stitches. Okay, there's no fabric scraps. These are all stitches. And then they're just a million threads. And some of these are wide. Some of these are extremely close together, like satin stitch embroidery. And then it's interconnected with this web of yarns, okay? And not your traditional mesh. It has a very textured look. Gua Pure laces have a very textured look. If you ever see anything like this at the store, go ahead and feel it. It's very thick. I don't know if you can really see on camera how thick it is. And this one is a more traditional floral design, but they're not all like that. This one is a geometric Gua Pure. Again, you see the very close stitches creating the design, but instead of a mesh, it's the same yarn creating a web connecting all the designs together. This is schiffli lace, also called embroidered lace, where you have a mesh, fine mesh background, and you have a design embroidered on top, usually on a repeat. Let's look at this up close. You see the mesh background and you see the embroidery. And here's the back of the embroidery. You can tell this one is a little bit cheap because the embroidery is not fine. Okay? Nice embroideries you should not be able to see my finger. Do you see how I'm moving my middle finger? I'm not flipping you off. I'm just showing you how see-through this embroidery is, because the stitches are not very close together. Okay? Embroidery stitches should be very close, and the whole thing should look very smooth and not this kind of wrinkly texture. Here is a swatch of a much higher quality schiffli. So you have your mesh, and then you have your beautiful embroidery with very tight stitches so that you can't, can you see? No, you can only tell my fingers moving because this part, but behind the embroidery, you can't see the outline of my finger. Well, there, because that's an actual hole, but you can't see it because the stitches are nice and tightly packed in there. Okay, next to each other, you can really tell the difference in the quality of the embroideries. And that's true of any embroidery, whether it's a schiffli lace or not. Just this leaf, it's just so smooth and nice. Okay. But these are called schiffli laces or embroidered laces, anywhere where it's like a fine mesh and then an embroidery design on it. This is not technically a lace, but I wanted to mention it because it gets brought up a lot. This is Eyelet, aka Broderie Anglaise. And that's probably, okay. So this is a fine white voile or batiste background. So not a mesh or net or tulle, but just a simple basket weave cotton with embroideries all over it. And typically there are a lot of these holes as part of the design that is stitched around. And that's why, you know, when you have eyelets for laces, for shoelaces, for, you know, that's why they're called eyelets as well, because it looks like this, like a hole punched out with stitching all around it. Okay, but this is eyelet. It's pretty, it's embroidered, it looks like it belongs in the lace family, it's got the scalloped hem, whatever, but it's not technically a lace. It's a embroidered fabric. It's embroidered cotton, so it's not even a schiffli. So let's talk about some things to think about when designing with lace. When you pick a lace, you really want to either emphasize or at least let the texture and the pattern shine. Otherwise, what is the point of spending all that money on lace? Am I right? And so think about seams and darts carefully. You don't want to cut up a beautiful design like this with a ton of pin tucks and darts and, you know, like if you want to put in a dart, that's what you're going to get. You know, I mean, I'm going to show you ways where you can cut and like overlap instead, but there will be some kind of place where there will be darting, and you can either do it the fast and easy way and get something that looks like this, or you can take the time to cut around and then overlap it carefully and then cut out the dart underlay and all of that stuff. So think about how much darting and tucking and pleating and folding you want to do. Now, ruffling is different. Like, if you have something heavy, like a nice Gua Pure Lace, it will make for some nice flounces and ruffles. So, you know, gathering it up and let it hang beautifully and drape and give it volume and stuff is different because, you know, it'll spread out and you'll still see the nice design. When you're designing with your lace, think about the size of your repeat and how to design around the size of your repeat. So when you have a lace like this, look at the size of this repeat. Here's my whole hand, and it still goes up here, and then you have more scalloped edge. But look how big this repeat is. So when you're cutting it, let's say you have two back panels. Do you want, if you have a design like this, you probably want to cut symmetrical pieces so that, you know, you have like complete circles as opposed to like one over here and like one over here. it can look a little bit disjointed. When you have a smaller design like this is pretty small. Look at my hand compared to that. I could fit 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 flowers in that space. The symmetry of mirror images like in the back pieces, that's not going to be as important in a small pattern. You always want to think about your linings and your underlinings very carefully. In my sewing lace video, if you want, I can show you how to sew lace by itself versus how to sew lace with an underlining. But either way, you have to think about what to put underneath, because this is very sheer. If you want something that is really sheer and you want to retain the delicacy and the sheerness, but you just want a little bit more structure, you can pick something like this very sheer organza to back it. Okay? Still very sheer, but it will help in sewing the seams. You can choose something like this that's it's still very thin. It's heavy for a silk, but it's still crepe, it's still fairly light, and it's not see-through. It's like translucent. You can see kind of the shadow of my fingers, but it's definitely not see-through. And then you can layer your lace on top. You could do a better color match than that. I was just choosing things I had laying around the studio. Honestly, have fun. You don't have to pick something plain. You can go for a wild print and layer another crazy lace on top and go for a really out there look, and just really let those two layers be a prominent feature. And when you have such fun fabrics together like this, you don't need a lot of surface details like rows of pin tucks and stuff. Another thing to think about is whether or not, I've mentioned this before, but again, think about whether or not your lace has scalloped edges and if you're going to use them as part of your design. This one, it doesn't have a distinct scalloped edge, but the edge of the fabric is cut around the design. So you can use it like that too. You can also add all kinds of embellishments on your laces. This one, it already comes with embellishments. Do you see the tiny little clear sequins? There's one. Ding, 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 ding. And it just creates a little bit of sparkle. Not like rhinestone bling, but just a little bit. It'll catch the light as you dance. This is a funny lace. It's like, you know, with modern technology, we have the ability to move beyond tradition and compile our own cool new fabrics. This is like a Gua Pure design, you know, with all the fat satin stitch embroideries on a mesh. It's like a Gua Pure meets schiffli, because the design looks more Gua Pure, but it's on a mesh, but it's not on like a traditional mesh. It's on this like spider web mesh. I kind of love these kinds of fabrics that defy simple categories. Again, don't forget to acknowledge the stretch. This has, I mean, it'll stretch because it's holy, but it's not meant to stretch because it's not stretchy. You know, just the fact that these holes exist, it'll make it stretch weirdly. But this is not something that is supposed to stretch, so don't make this into a stretch item. This is created with stretch. So you have a little bit of wiggle room, not this way so much, but just a little bit in this direction. And then this one is very stretchy, and you can really make more fitted like bodysuits and stuff out of this without a lot of shaping seams. Another important thing is trims like buttons, zippers. You know, you want to make sure that the weight of the zippers and the buttons don't make the whole garment hang awkwardly, that you can sew these closures in to create the look that you want. If you want something where it's really like high-end evening, you want things to look immaculate, maybe, you know, you want something like covered buttons that often work well, especially in a bridal setting. If something is like this, do you want to put in a huge metal zipper in this? You'll like rip the lace right away. You'd have to put this with a very substantial lining in order to use a substantial zipper. So just be careful in your trim and closure considerations when working with especially more delicate laces. I want to talk to you next about kind of pattern making and cutting and marking and kind of those kinds of details when it comes to lace. First of all, if you have a lace design that's big like this, repeat that's big like this, and you want to create strategic, symmetrical, or mirror image pieces for like 2 sides of the front or 2 sides of the back, skirt, things like that, you're going to want to buy a little bit more so that because usually when you buy a fabric and you have something like this, and it doesn't really matter where you cut it, as long as you're following the grain, the design is so small, you don't have to worry about much except for not wasting fabric and packing your pattern pieces as tightly as possible. But with a lace of a big design like this, where you want to do some strategic cutting, you want to make sure you buy extra so you have room to maneuver your pattern pieces. If you are going to use the scalloped edges as part, that is part of your lace, you also have to mark that in your tech pack, mark that in your patterns, make sure that that's known. And also you have to consider your fabric usage when you want to make sure you're using a specific part of your fabric. So this Chantilly lace is a paisley repeat, and you see this is the selvage here. And do you notice how the loops are all going in one direction? This is called a directional print or directional design. And so you need to mark on your pattern and on your marker that all your pattern pieces should be cut in one direction. Because honestly, do you want your whole dress where all the loops are going up and then one sleeve, the loops are going down? It's gonna look really awkward. So you need to mark for what is called a nap layout, N-A-P layout, nap layout. There's a category of fabrics called nap fabrics, and it's any fabrics where there are fibers or yarns or threads that stick up. So towels are like a very obvious example. Have you ever vacuumed a carpet and when you push the vacuum, it creates these streaks and stripes? See, when I push it this way, it looks different. When I push it this way, it looks different again. It's because of the loops that are sticking up from the base of the fabric. Velvets are like this. Suedes are like this. Furs are like this, faux and real, okay? So these are all nap fabrics. And so when you cut them out, all the pieces have to go the same direction. Otherwise, you'll have like a terry cloth jacket with one sleeve that's going like that. So let's say this is your fabric and here's your grain line, right? And when you lay out your pattern pieces, okay, let's say you're cutting, here's a bodice. So normally you have your grain line and you have your pattern pieces and then you pack them in, and as long as they're following the grain, it doesn't matter what direction. But when you have a pattern that's all going in one direction, nap layout, you want to make sure that everything is going in the same direction, and you'll mark it with one arrow so that everybody is going in the right direction, etc., etc. And yeah, nap layouts do require a bit more fabric. Now, when you have very textured laces like this Alençon or the Gua Pure, I like to make sure that I'm pressing on a towel. This is just a towel doubled over. It's pretty fluffy, okay? Nothing too stiff and matte. And I like to lay it face down so the texture of it is kind of going into the towel. And then lay my pressing cloth on top and then gently press. And again, most laces They don't really wrinkle too bad unless you folded it awkwardly and stored it for a long time. So you don't want to mash it down, and you don't need to mash it down, especially if you have a lace that has a lot of like pearls and beading on it on top of the cording and all of that stuff. You definitely want to retain the texture. You don't want to smash things, crush things. So you want to keep that texture. Okay. And this is a good spot to pause. Please give this video a thumbs up if you learned something new today. It really helps my channel out. And don't forget to drop me a comment below if you want that how to cut and sew lace video. Share this video with your fellow lace fanatics, and subscribe, hit the notification bell. Check the description box for related videos, links to my social media, all the ways you show me love, and I'll see you in the next video.